Welcome to the latest episode of the Streamline podcast, coming to you live from this amazing studio here in Nashville, Tennessee. And when I say amazing, I'm not even kidding. We're going to get some photos up of this later. But we do have a few people in the studio. Most importantly, my guest today is Cherie Hu, a music tech journalist. She's known for writing for Forbes, Billboard, her Music and Water newsletter, as well as podcasts. Cherie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, honored.
I just realized I messed up the name, didn't I?
It is Water very close. Water and music. Yes.
I just want to be clear.
No problem.
Did do my research before this. I am an active subscriber of the newsletter and the podcast, and it is early in the morning here in Nashville. So water and music.
Yes.
Cool. And of course, this is unscripted, if you couldn't tell. So there we go. Cherie, thank you so much for joining me. I know that we've been friends now for a few years, and I had the pleasure of being on your podcast recently, and I was equally as excited to be able to get you here today and have a chat, and quite fitting that last time we were in Austin, Texas, and now here we are in beautiful Nashville, Tennessee, in a big, beautiful home. Thank you, Brent Barkus, who is actually sitting over there recording us right now. We also have Jason Joven from Chartmetric in the room, kicking around here. So we got a nice, cozy little crew in here today. But I really wanted to get to know a little more about your story. I mean, a lot of people are familiar with Cherie Hu, the amazing music tech journalist. That's your newsletter, your podcast, and your various writing pieces for, as we mentioned, Forbes and Billboard. But where did you get your start, and how did you get into this?
Yeah, I did not expect to be where I am now, even like 4 or 5 years ago, I would say. So going all the way back, I guess my primary experience with music was as a performer. So I'm classically trained in piano. I was really serious with that, especially in middle and high school. And during high school, I was in the Juilliard School pre-college program for piano. So my lifestyle was very much just go to my local high school, come back, practice for like 3 hours a day of piano, and then do homework. And it was kind of like rinse and repeat. But I really enjoyed that experience, and I loved performing. And I was really close to just going to conservatory and studying piano and classical music full time in undergrad. Yeah. But also in high school, I guess in the normal school environment, I was a huge math nerd growing up. Math was my favorite class. I was on math counts, the math counts team in middle school, which is kind of like a math competition. And I was also on math team. There were 2 years when I was part of the team that made it to the New York State competition. So that was also a big part of just extracurricular and also just academic activity. And so I was really interested in the intersection of those two worlds from a very early age. I guess initially I was thinking mostly about how you would apply math to more creative aspects of music, like music theory. I feel like there's so much interesting research being done there about I guess the biggest example being a Bach chorale or a Bach suite. Just there are a lot of really interesting rules that Bach uses to inform all of his pieces. So that could definitely be expressed mathematically, I think. So I was thinking about all that in undergrad, but it wasn't until 2015, the winter 2015, that I really learned about the music industry generally, which is in hindsight is really interesting to think about because I had been playing piano for a really long time. Yeah, I was taking lessons from age 5 to age 18, essentially. Wow. But in that entire time, I really did not get any exposure to all the roles available in the music industry and what even it was like to work in music. And that's also the thing about classical, more than any other genre, it kind of teaches you that your technique alone is all you need to succeed. So I was very much ingrained in that. But during winter break 2015, I got to shadow the A&R team at Interscope Records. And it was through a program that I did through my college, Harvard College. They have an entertainment boot camp every winter break. And that just, completely opened my eyes to just everything that happened behind the scenes at a label. Or as part of that program, I and around 20 other students also got to tour all the major talent agencies, all the major film studios. And so that was just a really rapid fire first exposure to the mainstream entertainment world. Yeah. And I think that was also when it first clicked for me that I could also apply math and stats, which was my major I just declared at the time, to things happening behind the scenes in the music industry. Because there's tons of data being generated. As you know, really well from, the rise of streaming, and just there's so many more tools available at both artists and labels' disposals, just to figure out, how their music is being consumed, where their fans are, how they engage, etc. And so after that, the summer of 2015, I did a research project at Harvard Business School. They have like an undergraduate research program. And it's one of those where I actually didn't get to choose the project. They have like 15 projects determined ahead of time. And when you apply, you choose your preferences. But that year there was one about music. And it wasn't even like led by entertainment focused professors. It was led by this one professor, Kareem Lakhani, who in the years before had done this really interesting project on crowdfunding science research with NASA. Like NASA would like open, which is like really interesting, like opening up the gathering of like more astronomy related data, like from anyone who had a telescope, anyone who just like, was an enthusiast about this topic. And so like that's how he was approaching studying the music industry, as someone with that background. And I think in hindsight that also really informed how I'm thinking about like where the industry is going now. But I did a lot of research under his wing. I helped write a case study on Bandpage, which was kind of like an artist website, artist merch management tool that was acquired by YouTube and then shut down subsequently a few years later. Yeah, I did some research for a case study on that. That was also the first summer I got to meet and interview a lot of people who would go on to be like really influential in the music and tech space. So that was the first time I met Benji Rogers, interviewed him. That was the first time I learned about Patreon and talked with some people at the team there. And so it was really good. It was a really interesting mix of like macro financial trends and like financial analysis, and just like talking with music tech founders who are focused on serving the DIY artist, not necessarily the major label artist. So it's like a really, really good and really instructive mix. And so that project concluded, summer concluded. I had a ton of ideas in my head at that point of where the music and tech and startup space was going to go. And I knew that was my passion, but I just didn't know how to manifest it. I was like, I'll try anything. It was my junior year. So yeah, I'm thinking about like what I was going through at the time. So being a stats major, I was pulled in, kind of roped in with all the other stats majors to like the finance and consulting career fairs, which are like the loudest things on campus ever, especially junior and senior year. And I like very quickly realized that space was not for me. Like I wasn't really drawn to the process of even like applying and doing interviews for those jobs, because it seemed very like homogenizing to me. And so I like determined after a couple months, I'm not going to any more career fairs. I'm just going to focus on classes, just enjoy my time on campus. And then one day, I have a friend text me saying, "Hey, Cherie, there's this like other career fair for media and advertising that seems a lot more chill. Like it seems a lot more up your alley. It's much more creatively oriented. People seem a lot more open. You should totally go." And there were only 30 minutes left in the fair. But I was like, sure, I'll check it out. If like this friend, it was like a really good friend of mine. I was like, yeah, like trust your opinion. I'll like go see what happens. So I'm kind of like, rushing around the fair. So like all the major metro papers like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post were there. HBO was there, and Forbes was there. And I walked past the Forbes table, and the only reason I stopped is because there's an issue with Katy Perry on the cover. It was like their Celebrity 100 issue that year, where they like rank the wealthiest celebrities or like highest earning celebrities in a given year. So I see that and I'm like, I know Katy Perry somewhat. I'll like talk about Katy Perry with this person at the table and like see where it goes. And the person who happened to be there is my current editor or like main contact, who's the senior editor of entertainment at Forbes. His name is Zach Greenberg. And he and I like immediately hit it off. Like we had really interesting conversations about just like where the music industry was going. And I was telling him about like this project I'd done at HBS and my interest in music and tech. And he immediately said, we need more people to write about streaming for us now. Like we don't have anyone focused on streaming or on like music and tech specifically. Like there are people who are still write for Forbes today who like focus on the charts or who focus on like album reviews or artist interviews, but not on like the business side as it relates to tech and like streaming companies. Yeah, and he was like, oh, if you have any free time, you should like totally consider some examples and contributing if you'd like. And I was so surprised. And I did say yes in the moment, but I was also very stunned because like, to be honest, I knew nothing about freelancing at all. I knew nothing about like the Forbes contributor model. I was like very uninformed in that sense. Yeah, like to be honest, had not really gone to Forbes to even like read that much about music at all up until that point. I think it's changed. I think they've definitely like improved their contributor base significantly. But
well, you're one of them, right?
I am.
So you contributed to improving.
I am now one of them. Maybe. I hope so. Yeah,
definitely.
But yeah, and like I also didn't even expect to like get the position because the writing samples that I sent. I don't know if I ever told you this, but it was an arts column I'd written for like a school paper that was music related but not business related. It was like interviews with artists or like I guess like writing about events that were happening on campus. So it was that, and then it was a blog I just started on WordPress for free that was like really messy. It was just like bullet points in every post, just I guess jamming out my thoughts about the latest music industry news. Or I'd gone to this one event at Berkeley in Boston that was about music and innovation. So I just wrote a very quick recap of that. But that was it. And I was like, this is all I have. Hopefully it'll work. I don't know how you'll react to it. But yeah, I'm really, really grateful that I even got to like meet him, and that like let alone that he was so open to just like I guess my way of thinking. And so I emailed it to him, and he was like, this looks great. You should totally like start writing for us like whenever you're free.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I really enjoyed thinking about that story just because so many things had to come together for that to happen. I almost didn't go to the fair. I was like losing steam at that point, right, around like career fairs. And I'm like, yeah, very grateful for my friend for just encouraging me to go. And in hindsight, I had prepared for that moment without really knowing it, right, in terms of like doing all this research and starting to write about the space. And yeah, so that's how I got started writing. And I also was like, I'll try this out for a couple of months and I'll see, where it goes. I don't know if this will be a full-time thing, but I also very quickly realized that it was like a sweet spot of what I was interested in terms of like being interested in music and tech, and like an actual gap in the market. And that I was like, in writing my own pieces, I was trying to find other pieces that had been written that were taking a similarly, I guess, trend-oriented look at where the music industry was going, both historically, like looking back historically and also kind of like future gazing. And there really weren't any like publications or blogs or even writers that were focusing on this. And even today, in terms of people focusing on music and tech, no more than 10 people I know of, or I can think of off the top of my head in terms of like people who are really writing about this space. So it's still, I think, such an open opportunity for anyone interested in diving in. So I noticed that it was just, that combination of I was super interested in it, and like there actually is a demand for it. And like every time I'll publish an article, I just realized that there are more and more people who like wanted more discussion about these topics that just wasn't happening. And that definitely is changing now that companies like Spotify are now public, and there's a lot more competition in the streaming world, and more publications are kind of covering the space, which is really good. But that's what I guess encouraged me to keep going and now to be a full-time freelance writer. And I've been full-time freelance since August 2017, which is when I was like started living in New York full-time. And that's how I'm here.
Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Hopefully it wasn't too it's like definitely a very non-linear path.
It's great because I as mentioned, I've only known you within the last 2 years, so I didn't know the music background before that as well. I mean, obviously, you would have had to have had a love for music to want to get into the tech side as well and start writing about it. And as you mentioned, you wrote about artists as well at one point there. One thing that I do want to mention is that you're actually my number one go-to source for music tech news.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Am I really? Oh, wow.
And people go, because people go to me, how do you know about this stuff? How do you keep up? And I go, to be honest, I follow Cherie. And they go, really? I go, yeah, because the reason is a lot of this news just comes direct from the companies. They only feed so much into you. Whereas you will do some research, look into it a little further, compare it to other things that have come out. And a lot of people really value your opinion as well. I mean, there's an opinion in there too. And, it's great because I look at it and I go, when I read your writing, it's the equivalent of reading 20 different blogs and all the best pieces are put in. I just walk away and I go, I'm good now. I have an understanding of this, thanks to you.
Thank you. And I'm so glad to hear that. And it's also just really interesting because I don't see myself as a news writer. And like that's actually like I guess it was like a steep learning curve that I kind of had to go through, like jumping into the journalism world. which is very much driven by, at its worst, like content farming, right? Like you gotta publish as many articles as possible to maximize ad revenue. And as we've seen just in the first couple months of 2019 alone, a ton of companies are just not able to survive on that model. Like not even the BuzzFeeds of the world, which are very much seen as, role models for that, they've had to lay off tons of staff at the beginning of the year. So yeah, and like my style of writing, I actually like recently I was in a kind of like reflective mood, and I was looking back at the very first article I wrote for Forbes, and I kind of cringed a little bit because it is really academic. Like that's how I first started my writing, because that aside from like this arts column and this blog, like that was most of my experience with writing was like writing papers.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how I approached it. And now it's a bit more like casual and more like reader friendly. But yeah, like my style of writing, I like really like to just soak in ideas and like do a lot of really deep research. I try to interview like a minimum of 3-4 people per article. So that already like takes a lot of time as well. But yeah, so it's interesting. I'm like still, I guess you could call it attention, but I don't really feel like held back by it. But there definitely is a contrast between like how the media industry works and how I prefer to write, which is very much like a good week and a high volume week for me is like 2 articles per week. Like that's like, wow, it's like a ton of writing. Because I would prefer to have at least a couple of days to just think through ideas and do research. Yeah.
Definitely. And it's really cool the way you've set yourself up. You mentioned that you're freelance.
Yes.
So you're in control of what you do, what you don't do, what you take on. And you're in a position now, I mean, we won't talk numbers, but where with your Patreon, you're generating a significant amount of revenue that's able to fund this so that you can keep creating. It's amazing to see. And I love hearing stories like that where somebody is creating, because that's obviously Patreon being a platform for creators, and people being able to support you for the podcast and the newsletter and say, we want more of this. It's fantastic. And to see how quickly that happened as well. I remember you announced, I have a Patreon now. If anyone feels like supporting, that'd be great. And here's what I'd be happy to give you in return for your support. And then I remember a week later you posting about it, and I just went, wow. You got a lot of love out there.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it also like surprised me in terms of how quickly it grew. And like on Patreon, you can, I guess, list different goals. Like, when I raise $300 a month. So for this podcast that I now have, my first, like the lowest goal that I had was when I get to $300 a month, I'm going to start this podcast, and like now I can have the funds to pay for like equipment and everything. And I had like a timeline in my head of like when that was going to happen. Unfortunately, like the Patreon page is doing well enough that it just like shrunk that timeline by a lot. So I had to kind of like recalibrate everything, like, set aside time to actually work on the podcast earlier and so on. But yeah, and just to talk to the benefit of having something like Patreon as a freelance writer, I had this realization like covering the music industry and then reflecting on my own career and like the world of freelance writing, because artists, so musicians, are not like, some of them, they can be characterized as freelance, but they're just like general, independent creators, right? And there's a lot of conversation in the music industry about artists marketing direct to fan, right? And direct to consumer, and raising money directly from them, as opposed to going through a label and having to wait a long time to get paid for, record sales, for instance. There's very little conversation about that in media. Yeah. So like freelance writing, the dominant model is essentially a commission model. Like you get paid by publications, you get paid a flat fee, or you get paid, per word, depending on what you prefer. And unless you like go directly out of your way to set up something like a Patreon page, there's no way for readers to support you financially, which is kind of, I just like had that realization. I was like, why is this not more of a thing? And I think there is more conversation about that now, given like the ongoing layoffs happening in media. These writers are not choosing to go freelance; they're kind of thrown into it, like not out of their own volition. They're now trying to think of how can I like hedge against like how volatile this industry is now, and like actually have a community that I can speak directly to and also raise money directly from and earn income from. So, yeah, I think the freelance writing industry is like actually trailing behind music and other creative industries in that sense. Yeah.
As we mentioned earlier, Cherie, we're here during the Music Biz Conference, once again, in beautiful Nashville, Tennessee. I cannot say that enough. During this conference, I mean, I'll be honest, this time I'm actually just attending, and I've been really enjoying that. Had some great interactions, and the best meetings happen between meetings, I find. But I know that you've been involved. You were on a panel earlier this week as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. And actually, so as of recording this, I have a panel later this afternoon that I don't know how it'll go, but I'll mention both. So I'm moderating 2 panels this week, but the one I have already done, which I can talk to in terms of like the content, was the second edition of the Next Gen Now panel, which was started last year. And I guess the idea came from Nick Mayali, who's one of the like main programmers and organizers for the Music Biz Association of the conference. And last year, as well as this year, it's all musicians and also just young people who have entered into really high up leadership roles, who all are around 30 or younger. And it's the questions that we dive into revolve around just how they, I guess, one, how they got to where they are today, kind of like very similar to just like the first question that you asked for this episode, but also advice they would have for people just entering the music industry and how key functions of the music industry are changing, and like what both like the type of attitude you should have and the type of tactical and more tangible skills you should have as well. So for instance, on this panel, we had Derek Arrow, who is VP of A&R at RCA Records, I believe, and he was responsible for signing Brockhampton, Childish Gambino, or he was on the main team that signed them, Goldlink as well. And so I asked him some questions just about like, what does A&R even mean? Like if you ask a group of 10 people what A&R means, they probably all have different definitions. And like Derek has a very specific idea related to RCA's role, like in the artist development process. So we talked a lot about that. Cassidy Pope, who's an artist who has been a major label artist. She won The Voice and like was thrown into the major label world like through that. But now she's a fully independent artist, which is actually how she got started. And so she also talked a lot just to all those different paths to gaining an audience and earning income and having a fan base as an artist, and what are the benefits and limitations of all of those. Rosa Ashola was also on the panel. She heads up artist and label marketing for North America at Spotify. And so we talked with her just about the evolving role that Spotify is playing in the artist marketing world and label marketing world. That's definitely a very buzzy topic in the music industry right now. So yeah, it was a really refreshing kind of conversation for me, having mostly moderated panels in the past that were very much B2B, like talking to a room mostly of people who had been in the industry for a while and like diving deep into the weeds of things like data or, you know, like how companies should be run. Whereas last year as well as this year, I think around 50% of the audience was students. And there are a lot of people who are about to graduate and were like, how should I like put myself out there? How do I break as an artist? And it was very much like, how do I even start? And it was really great to, be part of that conversation. The panel that I'm doing today, this afternoon, or the second one, is very much more like a B2B kind of panel, I think, with some application for artists. But the topic is international rights and licensing for music. So as an artist or as a label who owns a certain catalog, how do you ensure, or a publisher as well, how do you ensure that all uses of your music globally are being tracked, let alone paid for? And as of right now, there's no singular dashboard that really allows you to do that effectively. And I think one assumption I do want to bring up during the panel is that when an artist thinks of international monetization and like international licensing, I can very easily see them look at platforms like Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube that collectively they're available in over 100 countries around the world. So they're very international platforms in terms of user bases. I can see an artist, uploading their songs to one of those platforms and thinking they're set. Like, oh, I'm covered for all my income. I can just kind of set it and forget it and lean back and let the money roll in. When, as we're going to talk about in this panel, that is just not true at all, because of the super complex nature of music rights. The fact that you have like PROs and sub-publishers which need to collect royalties locally for artists from abroad, and it's just so we're going to be diving into that complex landscape. Even though there's no real comprehensive dashboard that allows you to track all that, what comes close. So what do distribution platforms provide? The chief strategy officer of Songtrust is on the panel. So he's going to talk about what that platform provides for artists on the publishing side as well. So yeah, should be really interesting. Very different conversation though. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's a very important conversation because artists getting paid is important, but there's a lot of unclaimed royalties and revenue that's sitting there that they don't even know about because nobody's told them or they haven't learned, they haven't done their research. So it's great that you're bringing awareness to this and opening up the discussion so that artists can actually start to get one step closer to perhaps being a full-time artist. And yeah, I think it's a really important conversation that needs to be had, and I'm glad that you're going to be part of that as well, especially with your knowledge. As you mentioned, there are some platforms that are getting close to being able to handle all of this for you, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you're going to say in that. And of course, by the time this podcast is live, we'll know exactly what went down. And can we give a plug as well? There should be a way to access these recordings after the Music Biz conference as well. Are you familiar with where people can find that?
Yes. So it might actually only be available to badge holders, but there probably is a URL because I don't know if you've seen this, but like on the badge that everyone gets, it's like a QR code that will send people to a link that's run by this startup called Venue, I think is how you pronounce it. It's spelled VNUE, and they specialized in making archives of live concert recordings.
Yes.
But I think they're also partnering with conferences like Music Biz to create an archive of recordings on there, which is super valuable. Like there definitely been moments where I wish there was something recorded that I couldn't access after the fact. So yeah, I'm not too sure about the URL, but I'm sure it's publicly accessible if there's,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
and I did have a quick look on there yesterday, and thank you, because the reason I asked as well, not to put you on the spot, I forgot the name, Venue.
Okay.
So yeah, I believe it was, VNUE. But do a quick search for it. When I had a look online, they were available if you attend the conference to download. But if you didn't attend the conference, you can purchase the actual download for a small fee.
Okay.
And then, of course, you can listen to it on your device, which is extremely useful because you can listen on your time. You can be listening on your way or during the commute or anything.
That is also so smart from the conference perspective as well.
Yes.
Like in terms of how do you not rely solely on just this very limited time, event to build an audience to spread out some of the ideas that came out of the event. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see all conferences doing it because, I'll attend the conference and I'll gladly also pay for access to the recordings because there's so much that you try and absorb and you can only handle so much.
Yeah.
So then that way you've got access for a small fee.
Yeah.
Bring it on. I think it's a great idea. So that kind of leads me into, obviously music tech. Is there anything coming out, anything that you've been keeping a close eye on that you're very excited about or that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, so I guess the higher level topic that I'm really interested in, I'm going to borrow a term that actually comes from outside of music. So there's like a accelerator/membership program and also venture firm called BetaWorks based in New York. And I actually just got an email yesterday that they're hosting an entire symposium and accelerator around what they're calling synthetic media. And they define synthetic media as any synthetically or artificially generated media. So that can be artificially generated text, video, sounds, so artificially generated music, artificially generated, avatars. And they're funding and incubating a ton of companies that are productizing that experience. And just philosophically, there's so many things that I just don't think we are ready to really grapple with from just like a cultural perspective, a legal perspective, absolutely not in terms of, what happens when, to take a musical example, you have all this AI generated music like out in the landscape, the legal foundation of that in terms of who should own a piece of AI generated music that is now being monetized and earning royalties on Spotify. What happens if like an artist versus a label is like behind that? Those questions have not been answered. And actually to bring in another Music Biz panel that I went to that I really enjoyed about this topic specifically, about sort of the legal quandaries around AI-generated music. So I guess two things from that. One of my good friends in the industry is the CEO of this new startup called Boomy, that is one of many AI-generated music startups that has come up in the last couple of years. And the term that they're using is called instant music in terms of the user experience. So you can click a button and the songs that come out are actually like much more sonically interesting than the ones I'd heard from other startups, I think, in terms of like the variety of sounds that are available. And they're only like a couple months in beta. And I think they've made, if I remember correctly, I thought it was 8,000 and it might have been 80,000 tracks. And
either way, they're impressive numbers regardless, right?
Either way, that's a ton of music. Yeah. And I think for legal reasons, none of that's available on streaming services yet, but there will be a time when that funnel, like when that gap is closed, right? Like when you can release, I think the founder is very conscious of like not wanting to do this, but hypothetically, you could flood the market at that point, right? Like with just like, 1 minute, I guess 90-second tracks, they're just automatically generated. And yeah, just like the legal... So just grappling with the sheer volume of that, I think will be a really, concrete issue we'll have to deal with in the near future. And then also from that panel, there was someone from the U.S. Copyright Office, and she was talking about like drafts that they're now writing in real time, trying to grapple with, the extent to which an AI can like own a copyright to a song, which has been written in some other markets like the UK and Japan, I believe, but not in the US. As she said during the panel that some of the language that they're taking inspiration from and that they might use in this new draft was first introduced in the 60s, I believe. Or like it's like people are already asking these questions in like the mid 20th century, this is something that also I'm constantly learning more about, given that I've only been writing about music and tech for like not even 4 years, like 3-4 years. So many of the questions have been coming up like again and again, and it's been really fascinating to learn about how like history kind of repeats itself in that way, or no matter what the technological advancements, humanity kind of asks itself the same questions, even though like the technological and cultural climate is obviously very different at different points in time. But so that's one field I'm just very interested in, like what happens to quote unquote human, like there will always be human artists around. I'm not like worried about the extinction of like that sector at all, but just how commercially, legally, culturally will we deal with this, what is very much already an influx of, instantly generated music. Yeah. And just very quickly related to that, I am also really fascinated by this field of virtual influencers that are coming up, like Lil Miquela. For those listening who don't know her, you should look up the Instagram handle, Lil Miquela. She's a CGI influencer, so not tied to any like human personality in real life, but she has over 1.5 million followers on Instagram, has done fashion campaigns with Prada, Vogue, Outdoor Voices, a lot of like both very high-end and more boutique or like everyday brands. She now has her own merch line that is doing quite well, and it's like an Instagram native merch brand, which is so fascinating. Like that, so that's not like a music topic, but I'm equally as interested in those types of things. Like how do you run a retail brand that's Instagram native and that's like tailored to this app, this platform that now has, so many users around the world. So yeah, like that, I guess that plus a synthetic media thing that like all ties into this higher level question of how in the future we'll interact with like virtual beings, or just virtual things that can't necessarily be tied or are much more detached from a human personality or human source making that content. That makes sense.
Yeah. It's crazy to imagine what it's going to be like 5-10 years from now as well. And, to be able to interact with, I don't want to say something, but it's not a person, it's not a human being, and to get to the point where they may be able to develop emotions and have a meaningful conversation with you. It's crazy to imagine. It really is. I mean, a lot of people joke about it and say, if you've seen the Terminator movies, it's like Skynet. Are they going to get that smart that they become smarter than us? And then right. But in all honesty, I'm excited for it. I say bring it on. I mean, like you said, there's always going to be a place for an actual artist to walk in and record their voice, their vocals, their instrument. I don't think that's going to be replaced. I think, obviously with AI, with music, there's going to be more of that appearing, but I don't think that's necessarily going to get to the point where it's going to take over. I think you still need the human touch, and it still needs to be real at some point as well.
Totally. And I think I actually have an article that's coming up very soon, maybe already by the time this episode comes out, but I just finished like the final draft of my first piece for Resident Advisor. And it's about, thank you. It's about this group of electronic artists who are trying to take the lead in this conversation, and that they're using creative AI tools in their albums in really interesting ways that are actually like pushing the boundaries of creativity. Whereas I think a lot of people have a fear that creative AI is going to be the opposite of creative and will only make music more formulaic. Like there's a group of artists that are really using it in like really groundbreaking and more experimental ways. And yeah, I wanted to write that piece because I feel like so many of the companies leading the conversation are companies, like they're big tech corporations like Google, Facebook, Sony, Amazon, kind of like, yeah, like they all have massive resources to hire all the machine learning PhDs in the world to start working at their companies, in part to fund this technology that is not tied and owned by an artist. Whereas like these artists that I wrote about in this piece, like they're just collaborating with a singular developer, and it's like much more of a DIY, like homebrew kind of thing. And as a result, the output maybe isn't as clean, but that's the point. And I think it like makes a much more powerful statement if it's not as clean as like perfectly replicating a genre. Like, I don't know if that's not creatively very exciting. That's understandably like very fear like mongering to some people. So, yeah.
And I mean, AI has been used to analyze songs and predict hits as well, instead of just being used in the creation side. So, I'd like to see, some more expansion in that side of it as well, because I think it is a useful tool. I mean, you still need a human to use their own ears and actually listen to decide if the AI was accurate and on point, because obviously sometimes there's going to be people that are going to try and game the system and go, I know exactly what I need to feed in here to get picked up. I guess, what do the next 5 years look like for yourself? Where do you see yourself in 5 years from here?
That is very good. That's a very good question. And I'm like laughing to myself because the last 3.5, 4 years of writing, or just like life in general very recently, has taught me, or has encouraged me actually not to plan out more than a year. Just because, so a year ago, I knew about Patreon, but just never made the connection to use it for my own writing at all, actually. Or like I was not planning on doing it. I was making like a sustainable income from the traditional freelance writing model of publications, commissioning pieces, such that I like had never really thought about that. And now, obviously, like my mind and how I'm approaching my career has changed so much because I now have this Patreon page that's like doing quite well. So yeah, so it's very hard to look within 5 years' time, but I have like very loose ideas of like the lifestyle I'd want to have without like a specific job title in mind. So in moderation, I love to travel, and I would like to be able to maintain a career that allows me to travel frequently without feeling like restricted by like having to spend a certain amount of time in an office. And I love to travel. I just, in terms of like pieces I would want to write more of, I love writing about international, I guess, music markets and trends happening. And I want to, I guess, be also more careful about not writing about markets that I have never been to. Yes. And so I want to do more traveling so that I can be like fully immersed in these like, international cultures and fandoms that are happening, and actually meet people and like build relationships with people on the ground, and then write more about those markets. So like, I guess, independent of whether I end up writing, just like having that kind of experience of like being on the ground in all these places. Like I've not been to India yet. I'm hoping to go later this year. I'm like making plans to do that. I have been to China a lot, but like never in an industry context actually. So I want to do more of that. Southeast Asia, Africa would be like really fascinating as well. So yeah, it's just like traveling a lot. I really like and maybe this is like the academic in the back of my head still talking, but I like really like the concept of a career run on ideas. And like this is maybe what like a independent artist career essentially is as well. It's like a career run on creative ideas that are just manifested in sound. And I really like the process. So for me, like what makes a successful article for me, like of course there are metrics of like how many people clicked it, how many people finished or forwarded it, etc. But just like anecdotally, an idea of success for me is having a piece that's like built off largely on my own ideas, that like opens up people's minds, like opens up people's own ideas about what's possible in music, and like inspires them to do something, whether they're like an artist who never thought about a certain way to like make music or market music, or like someone within like even just like a major label who never thought about this kind of like partnership or this kind of opportunity in music, and like inspiring people in that way through ideas. Like that concept is like really cool to me, and that's what keeps me in the freelance writing world. And yeah, so I definitely would want to continue doing that in some capacity. And then finally, I guess I really enjoy being able to explore any area of music that I want, essentially, as a writer, and like having that 30,000 foot view is like how I always look at it now. And there are definitely other roles aside from writing that allow for that. Like I've definitely looked into or considered more strategy-oriented roles at music companies or entertainment companies. Or actually, for my own inspiration, I read a ton of blog posts from VCs and investors because their job is to be future-gazing always, and like their job is to predict correctly what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years. And so I'm very much trying to tap into their mindset as I'm writing as well. So yeah, it's like a very not concrete answer, but I have a much better idea now of like the type of mind space I want to be in, the type of ideas I want to engage in, types of like people I want to meet in terms of like getting to travel. So yeah, whatever job ends up coming in the future, I would love to preserve all those things. Yeah.
Definitely. And I feel like whatever does come next, you're going to be prepared for it in one way or another, because you are always very forward thinking and you're always looking at what's next, as well as, of course, understanding more about what's happening now that maybe there hasn't been enough light that's been shined on it as well. So, you know, I noticed, obviously, you mentioned AI and that, and we know that that's going to get bigger and bigger. But it's really exciting to hear that you're traveling as well. I mean, I must say I do envy you as well. I mean, I don't envy the amount of work that I see you do sometimes, but
it can be a lot of work,
and that shows, of course. But, you know, it's funny. I said it kind of reminds me of Carmen Sandiego, and but instead it's following Cherie Hu.
I'm laughing because there's like one CD-ROM game, a Carmen Sandiego game that I just played all the time for like an entire year. I must have been like 8 years old. It was a while ago, but I very much appreciate that analogy. Yes.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's so true. I mean, there's been times where I go, hey, I'm coming to New York. You go, oh, that's cool. I'm going to be in London. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I hear you're going to be in Australia in June. I'm going to be there in July. You know, we just keep chasing each other around. I mean, sometimes we connect like this and that's fantastic. Yeah. But I always enjoy watching that, and I kind of have to laugh to myself because I go, man, Cherie does not need a home right now. She's got a suitcase and a laptop and she's good. She's out. And, you know, I love that I see you have this nice balance as well. Like, yes, you're putting in the work, you're putting in the time, but you're actually getting out, you're enjoying the food, you're enjoying the music, you're enjoying the culture.
Oh my gosh, yes.
You know, you're actually experiencing this, and you get to put your little, I don't know why I said little. You get to put your tourist hat on. I guess. Yes.
Unabashedly tourist hat. Yes.
Yes. And that's so important because I really enjoy seeing that as well. And not just because we're friends. I know other people love to see that. They go, you're a real person. You've got an amazing brain. You're an amazing writer. But you also like to have fun and, you know, have a chat and get some food and just go out and see some cool stuff and live life. And I mean, the reason I say I envy you is, you know, with your age as well. I mean, a lot of people probably don't know from your writing. And but you are quite young in this industry. You know, it's really exciting to see because you really are part of the future and you're going to be around for a very long time and you're going to be doing this. And, you know, it must be pretty amazing to see people twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times your age coming up to you and actually going to your writing and coming to talk to you about it and, you know, tell you how much it really resonated with them and giving you a compliment. I mean, how does it feel to be a little bit of a rock star sometimes?
Oh my gosh.
I know I'm making you blush now. That's why I saved this till the end. But I mean, you know, you are recognized. You know, just like an artist, just like a TV personality, just like anyone out there, people are starting to recognize you from your writing. And I mean, you put your face in water and music, and people seek you out. They see you in a crowd. I've seen people come up, want to get a selfie and stuff like that. I mean, it's awesome to see, and you know, I'm grateful to be able to know you and to call you a friend as well.
Thank you.
And to see your journey. I feel like I'm part of it. I mean, obviously, I'm not in any way. I'm not taking any credit, but you know, I just wanted to say that and say how much I appreciate what you're doing, and you know, I've enjoyed watching this journey.
Thank you. Wow. No, yeah, I really appreciate that. And yeah, I lots of thoughts. So I guess one, yeah, you're saying like the word rock star, and I was like kind of like reacting to that because I'm just like I'm still learning still all the time, right? I've only been like writing about this space for a couple of years, and yet I guess like maybe the approach and how I'm like synthesizing all these ideas is like really valuable to people, which is amazing. But I'm also still there's like still so many open questions for me, and this like most recently hit me when I was doing this panel on Monday at Music Biz, the Next Gen Now panel. Because like I was asking questions that I was interested in, because all the panels had been in the industry for longer than I had, and like I wanted to know, like what advice would you have for someone who's like still in their early 20s, who's like trying to figure out, like what's next. So yeah, I still very much just consider myself, yes, just another person who's like learning and just happens to be sharing that knowledge and is very enthusiastic about sharing that. And yeah, I also am really glad that you brought up the notion of like, just being a tourist and not being afraid to do that, right?
Yeah.
And not being afraid to experience, local cultures or I guess wherever, you're traveling. I'm definitely a foodie. I would say like all my favorite Netflix shows are like the food shows, like Chef's Table, Parts Unknown, Anthony Bourdain. I like watch that like I've like finished almost all the episodes in those shows. And yeah, that's also like what I love about traveling equally, if not even more than just like meeting people at these events is, yeah, just like getting to know a place through their food and their music as well. And also not being afraid to like be, how do you say it? So, okay, this is like one thing that may or may not be related to all this. But one thing that's also really interesting, going all the way back to how I was raised about classical music culture, is that this is actually what a lot of people don't like about classical music, which I understand. But when you go to a concert, like a symphony orchestra concert, no one's talking during the show, right? You're like staying, like stuck in your seat, kind of either paying attention or like I've definitely been in concerts where you hear people snoring, like in the corner while an orchestra's performing, right? But it's like, it can feel very stale and very stuck. But I was very much, I guess, raised in that attitude of just being completely engrossed and paying 100% full attention to what like a performance is happening. And this is like sometimes come up as like a contrast to like, unfortunately, at a lot of these like music industry events, there'll be artists performing and like no one's really paying attention. Or like everyone's networking, everyone's like chattering over. And I'm very much still like of the culture of just wanting to be in a show and like pay 100% full attention, like not even like talk to anybody, just like fully engross myself in their performance. And like having also like relatively fewer times, but having been on that stage, like I definitely like empathize a lot with like, what they're doing when they're performing. And I very much, that's like one of the best, I guess, values of, or like, yeah, one of the best add-ons of just being able to go to all these conferences and festivals and speak is like experiencing all of that music and that performance as well. So yeah, that's kind of like going off on a tangent, but yeah, I guess in short, I'm like super grateful to be able to continue writing and to reach so many people. And I definitely want to continue, I guess, yeah, like showing that, yeah, that you could just be like a normal human being for sure. And that you can, I'm also the type of person who, for better or for worse in this industry, like needs at least 7 hours of sleep a night.
Yes.
Like if I don't get 7+ hours of sleep, I just can't function. I won't be able to write good articles, let alone just like, feel healthy and alive just like during the day. So yeah, balance is super important. Getting to know people as people, like the music business is like very much like a people business. So like definitely like respecting that. Yeah, all of that's super important to me.
The sleep is so important for anyone. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, what you're doing, sleep equals productivity. I find that the less sleep I have, the less productive I am. Whereas if I just get those extra 2 hours of sleep, I knock so much more work out in a day. It's mind-blowing. And I see these people forcing themselves at the keyboard, drinking that 4th cup of coffee for the day, sometimes even more. And they're just trying to force creativity and force themselves to get the work done when really they need to just even go and have a quick nap, go outside, go for a walk, reset, you come back, you get it done so much quicker.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad to hear that you do that. And, and you got into the good habits in the early stages of this as well. I mean, I say early stages, you've been doing this nearly 4 years, but, there's some people that still push themselves so hard. And, you've got to take time to rest. You've got to take time to enjoy it. And so it's so good to see that you are doing exactly that. And like you mentioned, you're a real person. We're real people. Everyone here is a person. Your favorite artist, you wait for their next song to come out, but they're busy being a person as well. They're doing other stuff. They got a family, or they got kids, or they want to go on a holiday where they're not performing and just go and enjoy that. So just keep that in mind when you meet people. I mean, we're all just regular people doing cool stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like when I first started writing and just like learning on the job, quote unquote, about how journalism worked, that's like one thing that stood out to me and about the journalism industry. And in some cases, this is appropriate like for like investigative reporting, but a lot of writers like intentionally keep themselves separate from like their readers, or like they intentionally keep a lot of things behind, I guess like close to them, and don't really want to reveal that much. And like if you're working with sensitive information, obviously, you want to maintain that practice. But and like the position that I'm in, I don't really see a reason to do that. Like I'm always like, maybe I'm on like Twitter too much, but I'm always like, I always love just like, asking, hey, what do you think about this? Like what are you all up to? Like, what do you think about this new trend, this piece of news? And like, I think that there's always room to have more open conversation about those kinds of things in music. So definitely happy to contribute to that anytime.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I feel like I should give you an opportunity to take a break and have a little bit of a rest before this panel later today, because I know how quick things move during these conferences, and that's why I'm extremely grateful as well for your time here today. Before we wrap this up, is there any advice that you would like to pass down to the listeners? Now, I know that we've already shared many pieces of advice in this episode, but it could be you could speak directly to a new artist that's looking to get their start, or it could just be general life advice, or even a cool hack that you've recently heard about. Not to put you on the spot, but if there's anything you would like to share.
Oh man, a piece of advice for...
Could be to an aspiring writer as well.
Yes, I have. Yeah, I guess like speaking from direct experience, I have a lot of ideas for writers. Or this could apply to art. Like there are a lot of artists across genres who like also do write a lot and like have built a following off of sharing their opinion. So let's see. There are a lot of like aspiring journalists or critics who have like emailed me or come up to me and they're like, I want to be a cultural critic. Like, what advice would you have for me? And like my piece of advice would always be like, so think about that phrase, cultural critic. If you're just starting out, I think that's too broad. Like, I think you really need to like hone in on one specific niche that you will own better than anyone else. And such that you become the go-to person to talk about that niche. So another example of another writer, Jida Dial, I think is her name. She wrote a 33 and a third like album book about Brian Eno, and she's an expert on Brian Eno, on experimental ambient electronic music, and that is like one of the most niche areas of music, just let alone like of the world, right? Like the audience is big, but it's not as big as like mainstream pop. But she's built an entire career off of being a critic of that space because she's proven that she has so much expertise in that space, such that like publications see her as the go-to person to write about that topic. And I think, like for anyone looking to either build a career as a writer or like thought leadership is a super buzzy term now, like how to even approach that. It's not just about general thought leadership. It's like being a leader in an area that you can own better than anyone else. And there's nothing too specific, I think, now that I feel like the podcasting world is a perfect example. There have been a lot of podcasts that have like had the most random topics. Like there's one I know of that's like kind of gaining a following now that's about, it's just like, I don't know what you'll think about this idea. It's about how like people in the blockchain industry approach relationships. Like wow. That's just so specific. And it's like, who's gonna really listen to that? But then it's like kind of gaining a following, and it like, but I feel like that's a perfect idea because there are a ton of people who are interested in blockchain, right? It's like definitely not a small industry. And these people are people. And
Yes.
then they're trying to figure out, like, how to navigate. This can be expanded to all of tech and all of, entrepreneurship. How do you, like, maintain a balanced life and maintain relationships with people in this world that's just moving so quickly? And through that such a niche, like, intersection, you can approach that topic that actually has, wide appeal. So, yeah, I think just don't be afraid to be too specific in that, and cultivate that kind of expertise early on, and position yourself as, like, the go-to person for, that kind of topic. And yeah, I'm just thinking of, like, an example for artists. I think, yeah, I've seen this activity a lot more in the world of hip hop, and specifically for, like, hip hop production.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you're familiar with the Music Entrepreneur Club.
Yep.
Or so Kato on the Track, the producer. I follow him on Instagram. He has such a good Instagram account. He publishes consistently. Consistency is also super key, I guess, in this world, for better or for worse, in terms of, like, publishing on a consistent basis. But he's become such, like, a outspoken voice just on the business of being an independent hip hop producer, which is, again, like, pretty niche, but, like, that market is very quickly growing because the barriers to entry for music production just keep getting lower and lower. And he's really carved out. In addition to, like, producing for a lot of Grammy-nominated, Grammy-winning artists, he's become a leader in that area of expertise that draws people in for reasons that are complementary to his music. It's, like, not competitive at all. So, yeah, I think that would be a general piece of advice for people who want to, like, rally people around certain ideas or want to become leaders in a certain space. Just, like, find like, a niche that, like, really, that you care a lot about, and that you can own better than anyone else.
Definitely. And, consistency is key, as you mentioned there as well. You don't just put one piece of content out and hope for the best. You just keep going. And then eventually that audience will grow, and they can discover your previous content as well, whether it's articles, whether it's social media posts, all of it combined. You show people that you're doing this, you're active, you're living this, you're breathing this. Eventually they're going to start catching on. And obviously that's worked out very well for you by sticking to what you know and what you love and what you enjoy writing about. Mm-hmm. This leads us to, where can people follow you? Now, I know obviously this is a great chance to plug the podcast, the newsletter, your website, and anywhere else that people can follow you. Yeah,
thank you for asking. So I guess I'm on Twitter a lot. You can follow me at my handle, Cherie Hu 42. The number is 42. I would say I'm most active on there social media wise. That's also my Instagram handle if you want to follow me there. My newsletter is called Water and Music, and you can access that so you can Google search that, like, Water and Music newsletter, and it should come up in the first, like, 3 results. But if not, you can also visit my website at cheriehu.com. There'll be a direct link to that. And there you can also see a select portfolio of all the writing that I've done across publications, because I've written for a lot of publications, and that's the best way, I think, to get, like, a more centralized idea of all the topics that I've covered. I've organized the portfolio by topic. So, like, there's a section on streaming, there's a section on live, a section on, like, music and gaming, and, like, other topics like that. And as for the podcast, if you also search up the Water and Music podcast, it should also come up. And it's available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, like, all the standard platforms. There's a great episode with Mike that I very much recommend you listen to.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And yeah, I guess last but not least, if you are interested in checking out my Patreon page and contributing financially, my website for that is patreon.com/CherieHu. And there are multiple tiers ranging from just $1 a month to $40 with various benefits in between. So, yeah.
Yep. And definitely worth checking out as well, because there's content and there's opportunities on there that you make available to reward your patrons on Patreon as well.
Yes. And I would say most of the benefits, just for those who are interested, are related to involvement in my writing process and my research process, even more than exclusive content. So I do post exclusive essays on there from time to time, but, like, if you contribute $3 or more a month, you can vote on future newsletter topics, or, like, what you're most interested in. You can give feedback on if there's anything that I'm missing. There's also a Discord channel that's connected to $7 a month and above, which has already been, like, pretty active in terms of people, like, asking questions or, sending news articles that are interesting. And then the $40 a month tier, gives you access to monthly video hangouts. And there have been 2 of them already so far. Pretty good size of people, like never any more than, 10 people. And they're completely optional, but we definitely dive into a lot of recent music industry news and trends during those. And yeah, those have been super enjoyable as well.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think it's time we wrap this up because I know you do have to head back to Music Biz right now. Just quickly, do want to say thank you to Jason Joven from Chartmetric. I know he didn't jump on the microphone here today, but I do just want to say we appreciate you being here as well. He's actually taken a bunch of tongue-tied at the end here. He's taken a bunch of photos and videos for the social media because, as mentioned, we're in this amazing studio.
He's doing double duty with 2 phones at once. At one point,
I don't know if you can be double parked with a phone in each hand, but the best part is
we got them both going, man.
There you go, Apple and Android, so we can take votes on which picture, which video turns out best. He's done landscape, he's done horizontal versus vertical,
everything.
So we are going to be blowing up your feeds with content from this.
Oh my gosh.
Mention as well Brent Barkus for inviting me along, getting in touch with me. His amazing studio here, I-65. Definitely look it up. You're going to see some pictures online. I can't say enough about how amazing this space is. And most importantly, Cherie, thank you. I know I've already told you how much I appreciate you, how much I've enjoyed your journey. I'm not trying to make you blush again, but I'm truly grateful to be able to call you a friend and to be able to watch and see what happens next. I appreciate your time here today, especially in between panels. Very kind of you.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you for introducing me to your audience. I've never been followed from so many music tech writers before on Twitter.
Really? I know. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, that's like exactly what I wanted. So yeah, that's awesome.
So I've been really careful about what I'm sharing on there now as well, just because of some of the people that are following, but very grateful.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But yeah. Look, once again, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing what's next. And as mentioned, you plugged all the socials before, but everyone out there, go to cheriehu.com as well, and definitely on Twitter at cheriehu42, and get in touch.
Yeah, then thank you again for having me. Yeah, this was a ton of fun.
Thank you.